Hello, everyone. Thank you for voting, and also thank you for coming. And today we're talking about hype. And maybe as a front-end developer, you already experienced that we are living in a hype-driven development environment. Hype-driven development is one of the things, but also there's the fear of missing out, because there are a bazillion new frameworks coming out every day, and you don't know, like, what should I learn, what should I follow, what should I need to apply, what do I have to apply, what do I have to learn. And so at some point we start kind of following just a few people on Twitter because, I don't know, maybe we heard them talking in one of the conferences, or we read a really cool Medium article from them, and so we are now following these people. But somehow this is just a very small group of people, and so we kind of end up in a bubble because these people follow each other, and so we maybe don't hear others people's opinions anymore. And maybe we even start taking everything for granted the people we follow say. So let me introduce you to the motto of the High Royal Society back in the day. That was a group dedicated to science. And back in the day, it was very common that the word of a person that was like a lord, or, I don't know, somebody who had money was, heard louder and better, and their opinion mattered more to people than, let's say, from a poor monk or some other worker on the street. And so the High Royal Society, the British Royal Society had one motto, and they call it nullius in verba. It's Latin. And that means don't take a word for granted. And so that means that we should listen to the facts and not only who says it. So, and this is what we're going to do today. We're talking about 5 theses, why we are currently using style components, and if they're right, if they're wrong. And I also want to give you a little disclaimer. So today I'm talking mostly about style components. There are other approaches of CSS and JS, but I have the most experience with that one, and also I think that's the most popular package right now for at least the React build. Also, I believe that the people that write these packages are awesome, so I don't have anything against them. This is really just mostly like what I experienced by working with this in real life, and trying now to compare with other solutions that are not CSS and JS in the classic approach. So, I think the biggest reason why we are starting to put our CSS in our JS is because, sadly, CSS is render blocking. That also means that we need to bring it to our clients as soon and as fast and as quick as possible. And how are we doing this? So if we look at the classic approach to include a style, it's by using a link tag that is just linking to a CSS file. And what then happens in the browser is the browser starts downloading the stuff. So first the browser needs to know what is all there with the contents of it. So there's the HTML. And then it starts downloading all the other stuff, which also contains our CSS. Because it doesn't make sense for the browser to start rendering or painting before it doesn't know how the stuff should look like. Otherwise, you would always see for a second a very ugly, unstyled page. And that's also not so nice. So the browser decides instead to show you a blank page until it all has downloaded all the files, and then it starts painting. So the easiest and fastest way to not have render blocking your styles is to have them included in your HTML by just having style tags and then put the styles all there. That was done even way before there was something like React or Vue or Angular, and people hated it because of different reasons. But we're back at that today, and it makes sense because when we now go, for example, for style components, this is like the biggest feature of it, you don't even have to write a CSS file anymore, because you just write all your styles in your JavaScript file next to the stuff where you have to your render and return of your component. which is really awesome, really nice, because it renders like this. So it generates you this button component, and it even generates you automatically some class names, and then it pastes inline the CSS in the bottom of the HTML. So we have achieved what we wanted. We have our HTML combined with our CSS, and so the browser can render faster than before. Because also, we only show the stuff that we show that we need in the first page. Because in our first page, there's only the components we show there, and so there's only the CSS of these components and nothing else. So we also show only the necessary, so the critical CSS path. Okay, but this is a problem we have since longer time, and other people already had this idea, and they built a thing called Webpack. Webpack is a module bundler and does some magic. So it goes through all your files and looks how they are tangled together, which imports which, and then it pipes it through and gives you out a very nice bundle of all of these things. So when you have your project and your Webpack is there, and then you configure it like this, that you add a CSS loader and a style loader to it, and then you can even say something like source maps is there, because that's one of the not so nice things when everything is crunched together. You don't know anymore where your pieces are coming from, and by source maps enabled, you still know where the stuff was once located. So what you then do is, in your JavaScript file with Webpack configured, you import your CSS file, not with a link like before, but with a just JavaScript import pointing to the file, and then Webpack does the rest of the magic for you. So it renders your vanilla button, and then it puts in the bottom of the HTML also your style, and puts a little nice comment to you where that original code was from. Also very nice. So kind of the same thing, solved. But so we have done all of this work, like configuring Webpack or style components to be faster. So let's compare them. I did a little experiment. It's a little blurry. So I created 4 buttons. So one is a vanilla version, that's the normal version. The other one is my primary button. The second one is my secondary button. And then there is a combination of primary and inactive state. So just what we do normally in our web applications, we combine stuff. And I approached this with 3 different things. First, I tried CSS, vanilla CSS with Webpack. Then I tried style components by using props, and I also tried style components by using the extend. So there is no extend, but you can take your primary button and then add another thing to it and extend it, and then it is your primary inactive. So I don't know if you can see this. So I let it all render in the browser, and they're not that far apart. So the normal CSS takes about 3.4 seconds until the first meaningful paint. The styled components with the props takes around 3.5 seconds until the first meaningful paint. And the extend one takes 3.6 seconds. That's all kind of very close to each other. But when you look at the other, the cake graph, the donut, you see that the scripting time is way bigger for the style components approach as for the CSS approach. Which also means they're growing faster, like this time of scripting time grows faster with the complexity of your component system. So the more props you use, the more extents you have, the more variations you have, the longer it will take to script. So it's a very vague thing I'm saying now, but it's most likely that in the long run, the style component approach will load not as fast as when you just have vanilla CSS. Okay, so next thing. Next very nice thesis, and that is collocation is king. So CSS has some issues by design. And it's not a mean thing to say, it's just fact. So in CSS, everything is global. In CSS, you have selectors which have very specific rules how to apply a style. And based on how intense and how strong your selector is, your style is stronger than the other one. And so now again, style components is going for collocation, which means that you put your style in the same thing as you put your render component, which means that it's always in the same file, it's always in the same location, and that helps you with these issues of the global stuff, the inheritance and everything, which is really nice. So awesome. So, but imagine, so this is something I copied from a project I'm currently working on. This is just style components in one of our a little bit more complex components. And I'm saying a little bit more, it's a teaser that has a button and a text on it, okay? And there are 100 lines of code that are only dedicated to styles. So if you want to see what's actually going on in that component, you need to scroll 100 lines, which is annoying, especially when you work on that thing more often. Also, just imagine you have a more generic component, like a wrapper, and you're doing your collocation, and somehow it is everywhere because you start copying everything because it's a generic component and probably the difference is not very big, so you have copies over and over by collocating your component in your render thingy. And then you maybe decide, okay, you know what, I give up on that collocation for some more generic components. I create a space where I put them a component folder. And then, because I also need to have variations on this very basic component, I start to import them and add more styles to them. I have a normal wrapper and then I create a gallery wrapper on it, which is nice and works so far. Really cool. But so it gets rendered to this. So we have very nice, not readable classes and just one style. And we don't know anymore which style is coming from because style components doesn't support source maps yet. And if you don't know exactly where all your wrappers are, you probably will never find that again. It's a little more helpful when we look at the React debugger, because there we can at least see, okay, that style is somewhere used in a component named cat gallery, so part of my style will be there, but I had very often times where I wasn't able to find the style that is bugging me, literally, without a project full text search. So that is how I'm finding my stuff now. Okay, but Babel for the rescue. Do you know Babel? That super cool translator thing? People have written plugins for that because they have been bugged by the same issue as I. And when you have configured the Babel plugin for style components, it finally adds something meaningful to those class names. And it adds the React component itself and the style component to your class name as prefix. So you have a better hint now where it is, more or less, depending on how good you are in your location style stuff. But also there's a non-plugin required solution to this issue, and it is called patterns. And there's one very nice pattern. I have tried it in several project so far, and that is called atomic design, where you start by like splitting your components in their parts. So you start by having the slightest thing, the smallest thing, like a button, and then you start combining it up to like molecules and organisms and templates and pages. And so by this way, you at least make sure that somehow you kind of know, okay, which parts of my components are like the basic ones that I have to reuse more often. So I locate them in one place, and then the other stuff I'm locating in like the bigger component, and so you kind of have a better guess on where to locate the stuff. That also helps you when you use style components. So this is no exclusive or something. You can combine them. It's really cool. So then, as I already have mentioned, the other thing that CSS is kind of bad about is scoping. What do I mean with scoping? Maybe one of you has done something like that before. Just having like a very long selector and then still have to run an important statement on it, because you have a very tangled CSS space and you don't know anymore where this comes from, or you have a third-party application that has like some very strong selectors, and there's no other way to come around it. So, yeah, style components means you put everything next to each other, which means you don't have classes anymore, which means you cannot have the strong selectors anymore. Yay, problem solved. But maybe you still have some legacy CSS laying around, or some CSS from a third-party plugin, maybe, and they have a very strong selector. So, and still, no matter what you do, because in your style component, you cannot access the class name anymore. You cannot like make your selector more specific. So as this selector is very specific, your button will still be pink, like forever. But Babel for the rescue! Yay! There's a second Babel plugin that allows you to generate something more specific, and it's doing it by how awesome. Oh yeah, the Babel plugin is named Babel plugin style component CSS namespace. Very nice word. And you can configure it. And then what it does, it duplicates your class name in your style definition to make it more specific than any other style. Yay! Okay, cool. Another non-plugin approach would be to generally use some naming convention. For example, BEM, which is working like with block element modifier. So that kind of could save you from too specific selectors. I mean, it still doesn't prevent you from bad third-party CSS, but at least your own CSS looks nicer then. Okay, so then the probably hardest thing in software development, next to centering stuff and yeah. Okay? Naming. Naming is really hard. What do I mean with that? So maybe one of you also have had that. You have a button that has like a bazillion class names on it. You maybe start like very nice with yourself, with just one class, maybe a second class, your modifier. Maybe you even use BEM, but somehow the next morning your designer comes in and gives you like this unicorn, and then you're like, okay, now I add the class unicorn to my button? Okay, good, good. Nah. So, style components, as I said, they generate the class names for you. So you don't have to care about this anymore, which is really, really awesome. But I have an unpopular opinion now for you. If you can't name a thing, you probably don't need it. So when I come into the situation that a designer comes up to me and gives me something, and even with all my atomic design approach, all my BEM classes, I still would add a class like fancy, I'm going to my designer and start asking them questions. So the first questions I usually ask is, what problem of the user should this thing solve? that is a very good question always to your designers. So what should it do? How should it help the user to solve a problem or to reach a goal? Then is this a variation of something that is already existing? And maybe why is this variation better? So maybe there's a drop shadow now on your button, and the drop shadow is there because there's now a button on a darker background than before. So then you should think about, okay, do we need to change all our backgrounds or not, or whatever? So, and also another question would be, is this a combination of something that we already have, just newly arranged, and does it matter to be like this, or would it be beneficial for us to maybe make an A/B test and see which of them is working better, and then we decide for just one of the variations? And also, that's also a very nice question. What is the semantic meaning of the thing? Like, is it the primary action? Is it like the call to action? Is it a warning, an information, an error? And all these helps you to define the name of a thing. And if you still can't find the name of the thing and your designer starts to questioning himself or herself, maybe you have saved all and every one of you from a fancy button class. Okay, so far we have talked about many of the issues of CSS. And also there's one really cool thing on style components, which you couldn't do before. And that's throwing props at everything. Awesome. Props. I love props. Okay, so now with style components, you can add this kind of props to your button and then use them for styling, which is really exciting. Unfortunately, it looks like this. So now you have your props, but somehow you have to apply them. And to apply them, you have to use more JavaScript, which means, in this case, error functions. And I have also seen something like that, with not error functions, but a lot of if-elses. And I don't know about you, but if you ask me, I don't want to maintain this. Because adding a new variation there would mean adding a new if, or maybe breaking all the other ifs. Or, I don't know, how would you remove a variation of that? How can you easily tell what style is applied in which case? So also, how does it look like when we render it? In the React debugger, it looks like this, that you can at least see what kind of props you are applying to it and what values they have. But in the end, it just is combined into, again, one style class. So you don't know which prop is causing which line of style. You can't tell from looking at the debugger in Chrome. Also, when we now take the other approach with the Babel plugin that gives us better class names, we still don't see what prop is causing which style. There is no mention of primary there. Okay, so let's try a different approach. Don't use props. Try the extents. But suddenly I have, by having just primary, secondary, normal, active, and inactive, I have now 6 button components. 6? Okay, yes, 6. And again, this is how they look in the browser, and somehow the primary inactive has 6 classes. 6 classes. Okay, and somehow from these 6 classes, only 3 provide style? Why? So at first I thought I have done something wrong. Maybe I have misconfigured style components. But then I found that on GitHub, and one of the contributors says, oh, we did this on purpose. That we add always another class to it that is there for identifying your component. Because when you have a closer look on all these classes, they change their name every time you add a new style or remove a style. So there's no way how you can predict what is happening based on your style class. But the second class, which hasn't any style rules, is the identifier, which is also just gibberish. So maybe someone can tell me why they didn't prefix them on default. I don't know, but they decided against it. Okay, let's look at some more classic stuff. Let's look at normal CSS, or SAS in this case, where I have created a button and added just the classes like I would usually do with primary and overwriting by inactive. And this is what it compiles to. Everybody has seen this already, so I can clearly tell like which class is causing which style, which is nice for debugging, I would say, and also maybe for identifying where I should probably optimize my style. Okay, but props. I want to have props. Please give me my props back. Okay, maybe I have something. How about best of both worlds? So maybe some of you have already noticed that CSS tries to create a higher order component, which is the shit in React, higher order components. So let's do some higher order component. So let's create a higher order component for a button and give it some props. For example, a type, for example, the inactive, and then take these props and make them into BEM classes. So we now have like the button as the block and the primary and inactive as modifiers. And then we just like give it to the component and return a button. So. And also something that we can do now, which CSS doesn't, with the props, is we can define prop types and default props. So everybody that wants to reuse a component we have done, for example a button, knows exactly what they can give as prop and will get like meaningful warning and error messages in the debugger when they throw something wrong at it, which is really nice, I believe. Okay, so let's summarize. That was a lot of talking about CSS. Okay, the render blocking part. We talked about it in the beginning. We can solve it with CSS. We can solve it with Webpack. So, and then you would probably need to look at what is going to be more performant for you in the long run. Then the conventions like using a design pattern like atomic design and naming conventions like BEM help you even if you are using style components. But also you can use them without style components and get rid of a couple of node modules, maybe. Then who had thought that communication can solve some problems like naming, like having too many variations on your website? So communication is always king and will definitely help you on getting rid of a lot of your problems. And then the last thing is props are really, really fancy, but they're dangerous and maybe hard to debug and maintain. Okay, so, but when is style components really beneficial for you? Because, I mean, a lot of users, people are using it already and like it and love it. And so I would say if you want to bootstrap something very quick, because you don't have to think too much about CSS architecture and everything, just put it next to your render stuff and you're good to go. It's really cool. Then, yeah, when you don't have a designer or you're not easily able to talk to them. I'm not saying that you don't want to talk to them, but maybe in some companies the designers are not in-house, they're somewhere else, and so you cannot like go and poke them every day. So maybe you just want to like solve things quickly and then go with style components. Yeah, that's one thing I haven't talked about yet, but the most awesome thing about the style components approach is that you can share them with your React Native application. Because React Native applications is not so well with vanilla CSS. So when you put your CSS in your JavaScript and then give it to the React Native, they can just use the same components as you do in your normal React application. So, and there's just one more thing I want to say, and that is the world is bigger than React. So I had the very nice privilege to listen once to a talk of Hakon Lee, who is one of the, who is like the father of CSS. He brought CSS to life back in the day when they were working on CERN together with Tim Berners-Lee. And he had a vision to make the web a nicer, prettier place. As pretty as they had in their environment. And so when you think back from the beginning of CSS to where it was there and where it is today, where we also have the abilities of pure CSS variables now, where we have now finally rounded corners and are now able to center things vertically. So there has been a lot. So maybe we should also trust in the development of CSS that it can overcome its issues and not just throwing the JavaScript hammer on it. So that's it.